Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Matthews Tucker, and I am the Vice President for Development, Marketing, and PR. And it's my pleasure to welcome you. If you'll please take a few moments to turn off your dull phones, smartphones. I bet no one has a pager. Any pagers? I didn't think so. I have a few announcements for both our members and the new people here in the audience. As most of you know, the Computer History Museum holds lectures just about once a month on average, not over the summer months, but sometimes twice. And it's a great opportunity to give you some of the updates about the exciting things that are happening here. Tonight represents the 19th edition of the Odysseys in Technology speaker series sponsored by Sun Labs. So I really want to thank Sun Labs for this wonderful support. You can join me. Tonight's presentation is co-hosted by ZeroOne San Jose, a global festival of art on the edge. And you'll hear more about the ZeroOne Festival from the speakers, but I want to say that ZeroOne was housed here at the museum for a couple of years just before moving down to San Jose recently, and so it's very nice to have them home tonight. Just in case you haven't heard, the Computer History Museum collects and preserves rare and important artifacts, from software to hardware to everything on the marketing end of the story, mugs, buttons, and t-shirts, etc. And we have quite simply the largest collection of its kind in the world. Every one of us here in this room is living the computer revolution. It's really our story. And so, at least in my mind, it's a great privilege to also participate in preserving the artifacts and stories so that both we and future generations can continue to better understand and enjoy them. We're creating this museum in stages. Later on down the road, we'll have a large, wonderful timeline of computing history and exciting exhibit galleries and other kinds of programs. Meanwhile, today in phase one, we're proud to share with you our tours, our volunteer programs, our events and programs like the speaker series, and also our fellow awards coming up on October 17. And you're all definitely invited. And if you talk to me ahead of time, I might even tell you who it is we'll be honoring this year. I have a couple of other brief updates. First, starting June 11, we're going to be open one additional day during the week. So that makes Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday that you can come for tours and bring people into the museum, both for self-guided and docent-led tours. Also, Core, the museum's magazine, is coming back. The last edition came out about 2 years ago now, and by the end of this month, a brand new, colorful, interesting publication is going to be in the mail on its way to our members. Next, good segue, our year ends on June 30, and so we're in the home stretch of our fundraising year. I just want to thank our members and supporters because we definitely could not do this without you. If you haven't yet written your check or donated your stock or that late model Ferrari, I'd encourage you to consider doing so before June 30 to help us attain our fundraising goals. And then finally, tonight, we have a drawing for a $200 gift certificate for ID Tech Camps, which is a program for ages 7 to 17. And you have a brochure on your seat, and we have Kendra Merrill of ID Tech Camps to come and do the drawing. I have witnessed the program in action. It's very exciting to see these young people get so hopped up and so creative using and exploring technology. So Kendra, would you please come up and help me with the drawing?
Thank you very much, Karen. As she said, I'm from ID Tech Camps. We offer hands-on technology summer programs for students ages 7 to 17. We're at over 40 universities nationwide here in the Bay Area. That includes Stanford, Santa Clara, UC Berkeley, UC Santa Cruz. And students, these are all hands-on project-based week-long sessions. So at the end of each week, each student will go home with a project in various courses, including 2D and 3D video game creation, digital video and movie production, website design and flash animation, programming and robotics. So without any further ado, I'd love to draw this, and thank you for everybody for entering. And the winner here, is it Hui Lu? Hui Lu? Right back there.
Great. Thanks, Kendra. Thank you. Good luck with the program this summer. We'll see you there. Tonight we welcome Joel Birnbaum, Steve Dietz, and Ben Hooker with the history, the future of the city. And I would like to introduce Steve Dietz, who will start off the discussion and introduce our other two speakers. Steve is director of the ICEA 2006 Symposium and ZeroOne San Jose, a new biennial festival of global art on the edge, will take place in San Jose this August. I believe it's the 7th through 13th. And Steve is former curator of new media at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he founded the New Media Initiatives Department back in 1996, the online Art Gallery 9 and Digital Art Study Collection. He also co-founded with the Minneapolis Institute of Arts the award-winning educational site Arts Connect Ed, and the artist community site, mnartist.org, with the McKnight Foundation. Steve has a long history of new media, and his interviews and writings have appeared extensively in prominent publications over the years. He taught about digital art at the California College of the Arts, Carleton College, the University of Minnesota, and the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And prior to the Walker Art Center, Steve was founding Chief of Publications and New Media Initiatives at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and editor of the scholarly journal American Art. Please welcome Steve Dietz.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. And thanks to the Computer Museum, History Museum, for inviting us and hosting this talk tonight. I want to say that this talk grew out of one of the main themes for the festival that Karen mentioned, which is the ZeroOne San Jose Festival, Global Festival of Art on the Edge. And it has 4 themes, one of which is the interactive city. And there will be many, over 150 artists at this festival, and we'll be talking a little bit in my part of the talk about that. But the reason this particular panel came together is that a lot of what artists can currently do is based on the kind of research that Joel in particular has helped with in the research labs at IBM and at HP, and that of course many of you here in the audience have also helped create these possibilities. So we're going to look at some of Joel's research and thinking about the idea of pervasive computing, talk a little bit about the festival, and then present one key project or one particular project by Ben Hooker and Shona Kitchen. I just want to acknowledge that I am one person of a much larger small organization, ZeroOne, and in particular that ZeroOne is comprised of several organizations, the San Jose Museum of Art, the City of San Jose itself, the San Jose State University, including the Cadre Lab for New Media, the Convention and Visitors Bureau in San Jose, the Tech Museum, the Cultural Initiatives of Silicon Valley, and Montalva Arts Center. So really a broad-based, ongoing festival that will happen every 2 years in the area. We could not be doing it without the support of our corporate sponsors, including Adobe, our visionary sponsor, as well as Sun Microsystems, who's not only sponsoring the event tonight, but is one of the main sponsors of the festival along with Comerica Bank, IDEO, and other corporations. So thank you for making this opportunity possible, and we'll try and move into the discussion immediately. Joel S. Birnbaum retired from the Hewlett Packard Company in February 1999, where he was Senior Vice President for Research and Development and Director of HP Labs. Birnbaum joined HP in 1980 after 15 years at IBM Research in Yorktown Heights, where his last position was Director of Computer Sciences. At IBM, he led the development of the first RISC computer and managed efforts that led to IBM products in speech recognition, industrial robotics, data acquisition and control systems, voicemail, and relational database, just for starters. At HP, his contributions included directing R&D leading to the HP PA RISC product line, the wide world architecture adopted for Intel's Titanium products, inkjet printing, and many others, including utility-based pervasive computing. Birnbaum holds a bachelor's degree in engineering physics from Cornell and master's and doctoral degrees in nuclear physics from Yale University. He's been elected to the National Academy of Engineering, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Royal Academy of Engineering of the UK, and is a fellow of the IEEE and ACM. He received honorary doctorates from the Technion University in Israel and the Sheffield Medal from Yale and the IEEE Weber Prize. So please welcome with me Joel Birnbaum.
Good evening. Thank you very much for that overlong introduction. I feel very honored to be asked to speak in this very distinguished series, and I have a very particular purpose. What I've been asked to cover is kind of a personal quest that has obsessed me for about 40 years, and to sort of say some things about how it might relate to this festival in August in San Jose. As you heard, I was a graduate student in physics at Yale. But during that time, I worked as a systems programmer for IBM, and later I designed some hardware and software to help with gathering the data for my thesis on the accelerator. As it turned out, I found that I enjoyed the programming at least as much as the physics, and so when I graduated, I joined IBM at Yorktown, and then was promptly assigned to Yale, where I headed a team whose job it was to automate the new Emperor tandem Van de Graaff, at the time the newest and largest Van de Graaff accelerator in the world. The IBM Yale team designed hardware, software, modified computers, wrote a new operating system, a lot of things of that sort. And it was quite a successful system, and it increased the productivity quite a bit of the laboratory. In fact, for about a period of 18 years, that laboratory graduated more PhDs in physics than any other in the world. And probably that system had a little to do with it. Nevertheless, I found the system to be very easy to use and quite elegant, my phone kept ringing, usually late at night. Very angry people would call and urge me to get down to the lab to fix the damn computer, which had broken again. Usually when I got there, the computer wasn't broken at all. Nothing was wrong. And the problem was a user error, which was based on a misunderstanding of how things work, despite the crystal clear documentation that I had personally written. It didn't take me very long to notice that while I was having this love affair with computers, most of my physics colleagues regarded them, and almost certainly me as well, with distaste, frustration, perhaps even loathing. For me, the computers had a crisp, logical beauty, and for them, the computers were a necessary evil, an irrationally arcane tool, certainly had nothing to do with the elegance of science, hard-to-use annoyances, arbitrarily complicated, and extremely unreliable. I quickly developed an appreciation of just how intimidating computers were, even to these very intelligent, highly technical people. And it started me on this lifelong journey of mine to try to improve the situation so that maybe someday more people would come to love computers the way I did. So ever since then, some 45 years ago, I've been a self-taught computer scientist, defrocked physicist, as I was once referred to on a panel, obsessed by the goal that one day computers would become a pervasive technology in our society. Now, a pervasive technology, in my definition of it, is one that is more noticeable by its absence than its presence, part of the everyday life of most people. Most pervasive technologies pass through 4 stages of evolution. They often begin as a laboratory prototype or scientific breakthrough. Then they become specialized and used by a select group of highly trained people, after which they pass to the 3rd stage, in which they're manufacturable and commonplace. The last step, pervasiveness, is not an automatic transition, and in fact, examples abound of very popular technologies that have never made it. Dirigibles, trolley cars, quadraphonic sound, direct current, electric power. The list is very, very long, and many of the examples seem quaint today. But once, very large industries placed very large bets on them. I'm going to try to show the first slide. Do I have to do something, or are you going to do it? That's not the first slide. That's from my, that's from my video, which comes later. Oh well. Why do these talks always include an IQ test? Which I usually fail. Okay. So now. Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit, to start with, about why it is that so many technologies fail to become pervasive. And in fact, there are 2 major enablers of pervasive technologies, virtually all of the ones I've ever been able to read about. The first is that because, by definition, almost all the users of a pervasive technology are beginners, that means that they have to be generally accessible through an interface that doesn't have to be easy to use, but it has to conform to a mental model and a style of usage which can be learned and then be handled intuitively. But perhaps even more importantly, it has to have, supporting that technology, an infrastructure perceived valuable enough to support the immense investments of governments and often private industry that would support it. For many years, to give a feeling for how we could think about this, I've used electric motors as a good example of a technology that's both pervasive and ubiquitous, which doesn't mean quite the same thing. It means found commonly almost everywhere. Electric motors are so commonly embedded in many other devices that most people have no idea how many they own. I think if you do a little mental catalog, you'll see that you probably can't get within a factor of 5 of how many exist in your house, because you have no idea how many are in your VCR or your washing machine, let alone your car or anything else. Of course, the motors are different. They're highly evolved. They're very specialized. Many talented engineers spend their whole careers improving them. But we take the motors for granted because all we care about is how well the appliance that they're embedded in does its job. The usefulness depends, in almost every case, on the existence of a mature, reliable, universal infrastructure, the electric power utility. The same could be said of the automobile, which would still probably be a private plaything of rich people who had races with it if we hadn't invested in the highway infrastructure. The innumerable other infrastructures that you can think about are also almost invisible. We notice them only when they fail because they are so woven into the fabric of our society and so much a part of the everyday life of most ordinary people. It's very well known and has been frequently observed that as technologies mature toward pervasiveness, their interfaces usually evolve to hide their own complexity. For example, consider today's TV set, one button on, it's replaced a whole raft of buttons. Consider the electric starter in the car. Both are much more complicated than their manual predecessors, and yet they're far more intuitive from the user's point of view. So the progression of technology makes the complexity affordable, and the everyday usage by ordinary people, which defines pervasive technology, mandates that the technology evolve to permit ease of use. Winston Churchill once remarked that the more we know about where we have been, the more we'll know about where we're going. And in that spirit, I'd like to now show you a slide so that I can maintain the perfect record of having used it in virtually every talk I've given for 24 years now. I first made the precursor of this slide in 1982, shortly after I came to HP, to help me understand the progression and trajectory of information technology over the previous few decades and a couple decades ahead. This is a 1994 version. The words have changed slightly, but the curves haven't changed and the ideas haven't changed. And this slide has driven a lot of the research agenda of HP and a lot of the resultant development expenditure, in fact, ever since. So this is a complex slide, and I'm going to leave it up here. So if you would rather read this and listen to me, it'll be here for quite a while. In this slide, which shows the penetration of a technology, the usual S-curve kind of picture, versus decades starting in 1960, the computing elements are shown underneath the S-curves, and how they are interconnected to form systems is shown above. The first 3 decades of the progression of the devices are based on the rather remarkable fact that the value of information is independent of the size of its physical container. And so that means that the geometrical scaling of semiconductor devices can improve all measurable parameters exponentially. The key inflection point for the devices is the one about the beginning of the 1990s, in which making the devices smaller and smaller, and therefore faster and cheaper and less power hungry and so forth, finally led to the ability to produce them in sufficient volume so that they could be specialized and yet still be priced for mass markets. At about the same time, the architected connectivity between the requesters and providers of services, so-called clients and servers, was the critical transition for information technology. That is to become open in that decade and pervasive, I thought, within the next one, because it enabled many systems and many applications from different manufacturers to work cooperatively across networks, even if they hadn't been designed by their users to do so, or by their designers to do so. Well, in the early 1980s, this kind of a slide was a topic of continuous conversation in the halls of HP. And HP, remarkably, took the enormous bet that I never could convince IBM to take, and that was that we could create a flat playing field as a very, very small and very late player in the computer game, if we bet that this transition would take place. And that led to the decision somewhere in the early 80s, early to mid 80s, to go with RISC architecture, because RISC architecture, having no microcode, executing all of its instructions in a single cycle, was scalable, and of course, as it turned out, offered high performance as well. We also dropped all of our proprietary operating systems and adopted Unix, because we hoped that it would lead to open, interoperable software, even for commercial and real-time applications. We adopted open network protocols to enable the client-server computing. And we even adopted, real sacrilege at the time, open peripherals, so that we could become a volume manufacturer of printers and disks and scanners, completely unthinkable before that time. They were only sold on HP systems, as hard as it may be to remember that. Well, as you know, it turned out to be a good guess. And so with a lot of work and a lot of ups and downs, the $3 billion 1981 instrument and computer company today is an $85 billion instrument and computer company, 2 companies actually, Agilent and HP. But what I want to talk about today is not that story, but the next inflection point, because that's the one that I always have been pursuing. The others were a means to that end. And it's very interesting because it's different not only in degree, but in kind. It suggests that open distributed systems of the client-server distributed sort that we were selling would evolve naturally to an open, standards-based information utility, and that a new era of open, collaborative, electronic services built upon it would define the information infrastructure of this, the 21st century. So I'm going to spend some time now talking about this notion of an information utility. An information utility is not a new idea. It's not my idea. It's merely one whose time has finally come. Listen to Professor John McCarthy, then of Project Mac, speaking at the MIT Centennial 1961, quote, "If computers of the kind I have advocated become the computers of the future, then computing may someday be recognized as a public utility. The computer utility could become the basis of a new and important industry. 5 years later, I was enormously influenced by an article in Scientific American by Professors Robert Fano and Fernando Corbuto, talking about the experience of the MIT time-sharing project. Quote, "The system makes it possible for the users to carry on a discourse with one another through the machine, drawing on its large store of knowledge and its computing speed as they do so. This time-sharing computer system can unite a group of investigators in a cooperative search for a solution to a common problem, or it can serve as a community pool of knowledge and skill on which anyone can draw according to his needs. Projecting the concept on a large scale, one can conceive of such a facility as an extraordinarily powerful library serving an entire community. In short, an intellectual public utility." Wow. 1966, they said that. What a wonderful idea. Unfortunately, 40 years or so before its time, ultimately time-sharing failed to become pervasive. It never made it to the fourth stage because it was proprietary, centralized, geographically constrained, and because it was born in an era of limited and expensive and wired communications bandwidth. I think that's enough for that slide. Probably they've gotten sick of it by now. Turn it off. Yeah. Good, thank you. So I kept waiting for the utility to come, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited 20 years. And for many years, technology languished in a sea of proprietary networks, mean, petty arguments about standards, solutions that were exclusive to a manufacturer that got in the way of the standards that would be necessary for this dream of an information utility to come true. And then in 1 year, a miracle occurred. Both of the problems necessary to make something pervasive happened not from the computer manufacturers, not from the computer science departments, not from the electrical engineering departments, but from users, the way most inventions usually come, because they're trying to solve a specific problem that meets their needs. And in this case, lo and behold, it came from the nuclear physicists, avid, sophisticated users of computer technology. Of course, the people weren't physicists. But out of CERN came the World Wide Web, based on the quarter-century-old internet, benefits so profound that a de facto connectivity standard seemed to emerge almost overnight. Of course, we know that's not really true. And the disarmingly simple, incredibly elegant Mosaic, which came out of NCSA, and these cleared the way for point-and-click, truly intuitive access. Suddenly, there was a basis for a true global information infrastructure, a kind of non-proprietary global time-sharing system. Some people have talked of it as the revenge of time-sharing. It might be going a little far. I believe that these two innovations taken together are ultimately going to be thought of as among the great developments in the history of our civilization, because eventually there will be practically nothing that we do that isn't affected in one way or another by them. Again, done by users. Let's talk about an information utility. It has to have characteristics common to all utilities. That means you notice it only when it fails. It must be secure, reliable, ubiquitous. Standards for its use must endure over decades, and its value must be great enough to merit the investments. Consider the electric power utility. The familiar plug in the wall is over 100 years old. There's huge changes in how the power is generated behind the wall and what plugs into it from this side of the wall, but the interface has stayed the same, and that standard has enabled and ennobled innovation, both in how to manufacture and distribute power and what you plug in to take advantage of the power. So the fundamental characteristic of an information utility is that it transforms computing from a capital investment into a competitive service. The costs are amortized over many users, and they're paid for according to how you use them. We could all provide electricity for our own homes if we chose to by buying an electric generator. Many of us could dig a well to get water and so forth. But for most people, it's a lot easier to subscribe to a utility to get those services, just as we do for communications. For many users, the same is going to be true for computing. There are going to be a lot of benefits for users. The ability to pay for usage will be less expensive because the cost will be amortized. It should be more reliable. Sometimes you'll be able to use special machines. The equipment will last longer because we care about capacity, not machine model. There'll be simpler and more effective mechanisms for collaboration. We'll be able to structure applications of combinations of existing ones, provided that there's an interface that enables us to compose them. And many, many others. The notion of an information infrastructure built upon the standards already set for the web, but extending them to improve its robustness, its performance, and of course its manageability, and especially its security, as the systems scale to huge numbers of users, is at the heart of most large industrial systems efforts today. Wireless communication, of course, it goes without saying, plays a major role in all of this. One thing we know is that if it really happens, and if computing comes to be a utility used by most people in a pervasive sense, it is invariably going to catalyze entire new industries and change social structures. For example, we put in a highway infrastructure supporting the automobile, and entirely new industries sprung up. Automobile insurance, traffic light manufacturing, car rental, driver training schools, you get the idea. And there were new social institutions, suburbs, shopping malls, drive-in restaurants, and so forth. New utilities are invariably enormously lucrative. So for all of these reasons, and a few others, in 1984, when I became the head of HP Labs, the very first thing that I did was to call a meeting and charter a program that for more than a decade was called the Domestication of the Computer. That funny name hides a very simple idea. As with the domestication of animals, the domestication of technology means two things. First, the technology has to be tamed so that it's accessible to all. And secondly, it has to be selectively bred to optimize the most desirable features. So in HP Labs, which was under my control then, we could embark on a global program to make access more intuitive for ordinary people and begin to develop the appropriate supporting information system. I'm going to tell you a little about that program, and then I'm going to try to relate it to this festival by showing you some videos. If you believe in the computing utility, particularly one which links services as well as linking data, you are led inexorably to the notion of information appliances. I started using that term in the early 80s. I don't think I invented it, but I don't know who did. And I used it to refer not to small general purpose repackaged PCs, but to dedicated devices that contained information technology and which permitted intuitive access for the performance of a specific task. The word appliance actually comes from the same root as the word application, which means a means to an end. Appliances are usually named by what they do. Think of the telephone, the television, the washing machine, the automobile. They don't have to be portable. Think of refrigerators and trucks, for example. They can communicate. They could be a member of a family of cooperating devices. They could contain sensors, and they could be particularized for a particular user or a particular class of tasks. In the early 1990s, we thought this was such a good idea that we created an entire laboratory in our Bristol, England facility and applied the work and technology of much of the company and many other laboratories to trying to understand how we might take advantage of this new way of thinking about computing. For example, many of our prototype information appliances included sensors and communications capabilities to make them more approachable. As network bandwidth increases and as it becomes far less expensive, the cost of appliances drop sharply because much of the computation to support the rich multimedia human interface can now reside remotely on the information utility. Voice and handwriting recognition, pictorial commands, simple software agents, high-level commands were among the many things we worked on to help minimize the need for attention to detail. I think that very soon, most appliances are going to know who and where the user is. That's going to greatly aid in natural usage since we won't have to enter annoying things like time and zip code and so forth. Many of the annoying chores like access password hierarchies, given appropriate security, are also going to be contained. Once information appliances carry and communicate their own attributes, intelligent, cooperative software agents are going to be able to make connections, to gather and coordinate information, and to some extent negotiate for us. For example, one day your smart wallet appliance may help you to buy a Coke in your office for about $1. But the next day, if you're out on a golf course and your agent is negotiating with the Coke machine on the golf course, which happens to know that it's 100 degrees out and you're 1 mile from the clubhouse, it's quite unlikely you're going to pay $1 for that second Coke. Another consequence of the capabilities of the future appliances are going to be that the ownership of a particular appliance is not going to be particularly important. If you leave your cell phone in a cab, the person who finds it and who uses it, probably through biometric identification, is going to be identified and billed, not you. Electronic clipboards, phones, navigators, measurement appliances, laptops, palm tops, and all the other devices that can be given to visitors when they visit a museum or a library or a hospital or an office building can be treated as community property in a company or a school. And all of the user rights and the access rights, the profiles, the billing, and so on will be handled automatically and transparently by an e-services utility. This will be a unique example of a utility working for you instead of you working for the utility, which is the case mostly today. If the system knows who you are and where you are, it can also know, through the addition of appropriate sensors, what's going on around you. That is, what's the environment that the device is being used in? Is the user indoors or outdoors? Is he in a moving vehicle or is he stationary? Is he alone or in a group? What other appliances are active? What's the ambient noise level, the lighting level, the temperature? The idea is that we can use technology to take individually pre-specified actions without user intervention. The user need not do anything but concentrate on his task. Watch the video, take the picture, listen to the music, just travel. The application is the user, the device, and the e-services on the supporting infrastructure. In the early 90s, we decided to call this set of interlocking initiatives within the company MC squared, an unfortunate joke that I made up one day that stuck around for a lot of years. It represented the fusion of measurement, computing, and communication, the three core competencies of HP, the only major American company with all three, and one of only 3 companies in the world at that time that had those competencies. We felt that the vision of sensor-rich, pervasive computing needed to be made real to employees, and in order to do that and to stiffen the spines of some of our executives, abject failure of my career, we made a set of internal videos we intended to be internal. They wound up getting shown on Nova and a few other places, and you may have seen one or more of these, that are based upon these ideas: an always-on information utility, families of sentient, communicating information appliances, software technology that connects the users to supporting linked e-services. They're about 15 minutes long. They're done by professional video people, but I'm guilty of writing some of the scripts, and the HP Labs people wrote all the technology backgrounders and built most of the props, because although some of these look a lot like what you're familiar with, they were mostly made 10 to 15 years ago. And we didn't have flat screen displays, and we didn't have PDAs, and so they're mostly made out of cardboard, and people figured out ways to make them look real afterwards. The other problem here is that if you make things that look too different from things that people are already using, and you're trying to convince people that they ought to invest money in them, they think that you're peddling science fiction. And so a lot of the interfaces here will look quite familiar to you. First, we're going to look at a few clips from a video. So now I've got to do this, right? Yeah. That was called Synergies. It dramatizes how pervasive measurement, computing, and communications technologies could be combined to deal with the municipal crisis. We chose emergency disaster response as a topic, and because we thought it dramatized the need for interfaces that could be used easily and under stress. We started it in about 1992. About 1994, just as we were finishing it up, the Northridge earthquake occurred, and so what you're going to be seeing here is some spliced in later footage from the real earthquake, along with some studio footage. The idea of the video is, what would the disaster response be, think 9/11 and Katrina, sadly, if you projected forward 10 years. So this is what we thought might be possible by the year 2001. We're just going to see a few clips of it. The interfaces here and the activities were actually specified by the Portland, Oregon Emergency Response Center. In fact, in all of these, domain experts said what they would want, and we tried to figure out what the technology would be to satisfy it. After we showed this publicly, we got calls from about 17 emergency response centers asking if they could buy the system. You'll have to watch this really closely and the following video clips as well, because the speed of using the devices here is what is required by the application. And if you've seen kids using cell phones, you know that the way people use pervasive technologies is that they become very familiar with them and they do them with great dexterity. So I'm going to start this, and we'll watch, I think it's 4 segments, and these stories are kind of corny. They always have a happy ending. They involve otherwise unemployable professional actors. But the technology is what we thought was really going to happen. I think it maybe needs to be louder. Over. About 3 minutes over. So that was an embedded sensor network. We were working at the time with the state of California to try to design that for earthquake detection. When I first started showing this video, every audience always snickered at the policewoman's language translator. The reason, of course, it was in 1995. It seemed ridiculous to have that much functionality in such a small package, and of course we didn't really know how to do a lot of the other stuff either. But today, this audience hardly made any noise. That means you're much more sophisticated and that you undoubtedly realized that the seemingly magic translation appliance is pretty much an empty box. It has a standard microprocessor, a microphone, a speaker, and some wireless network electronics. All of the computation for speech recognition, speech understanding, language translation, and voice synthesis is being done on separate, large, optimized, shared, parallel machines on the computer utility. In other words, linked e-services based on powerful specialized network processors and accessed wirelessly from a single mobile appliance by a single button that was called Spanish in that video, can transparently enable a far richer and a much more natural user interface than would otherwise be feasible. The point is that one day processors may indeed become molecular and may be powerful enough to incorporate that kind of capability in a device, but there's absolutely no reason to wait. It can be done now. In the late 90s, we added to these ideas some new ones. The idea that any object could have a web address, and so you could think about blurring the real and the cyber worlds. We also began focusing on embedded sensors, linked e-services, and smart spaces. We renamed the efforts a Cool Town. Here are 3 looks at some of the possibilities.
Play voicemail. Message 1. Hey, this is Dave. Stop. Delete. Message 2. Hello, Mr. Carlson. Your reservation request for me. Stop. Delete. Message 3. Yeah, Terry, that being important who doesn't do. Call me as soon as you can. 1. Breakdown minute. CarTrack recommends immediate service. Oh no, not me. To locate your nearest service station, turn right at Avenue. Continue north for 1 mile. Turn left at Pervasive. Proceed 2 miles to the next service station. Hi. Hi, Barry Carlson. Yes. CarTrack noted that you're on your way. Got your paperwork ready to go. Just sign it right. Great. I guess all I need now is a cab. Guess all I need now is $1 million. Yeah, look at it, right? It's a matter of life and death.
This was done during a joint study with Swatch. Really, really.
Paramedics, Ms. Walters. Check responsiveness while I pull up the record on. Looks like the defibrillator just shot her heart. She said the sign was really not fast. Let's prepare for lighting. Let me check her sync history. Okay, her sync history is clear. Let's give her 100
The next clips, and we're just about done, show a couple of other new technologies. The ability of objects to identify themselves passively, for example, by RFID, and the ability to provide utility services like the language translation we saw before on a common appliance like a cell phone. The second one also highlights the promotion of peripherals, such as printers, to first-class client-citizen status. That is now peripheral to people and not to central processors. This is from a thing honoring a great teacher. I always wanted to build that memory box, but no one else wanted it. I'm going to cut it off. We're running late. He buys her a painting by pointing the device at the painting, which then prints it out for him, a print of it. It's a truism that the creators of a technology, you can turn it off, thanks, are not very good at foreseeing the additional applications that technology may evolve to. We shouldn't have expected Gutenberg to foresee greeting cards, and we never expected Michael Faraday to think of a DVD player or the electric toothbrush. Now in August, the ZeroOne Festival is going to take early variants of these kinds of pervasive technologies involving sensors and appliances, some network services, and it's going to be applied to new realizations of the arts. I have to admit that my own personal tastes are far more attuned to Raphael and Mozart than to more modern expressions of art and music, but I'm keeping a very open mind, and I'm prepared for some new experiences and many new insights during the festival. But I think it's necessary to establish some careful metrics for success whenever new technologies dramatically change the way we do things, so that whenever possible, metrics can be quantitative and measured in terms of the objectives from the user's point of view. So for example, a technical metric like performance or system availability and reliability can then be derived from the user requirements. Today, though, I'd like to end by suggesting that there is another kind of metric, a subjective metric, that I think is much more appropriate when we think about the festival. And I'd like to quote a short passage from The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupry. In that book, you may remember the little prince in love with what he thinks is a unique flower on a tiny planet, but exasperated by her pettiness and her idiosyncrasies, has wandered from asteroid to asteroid examining the strange ways of humans until at last he reaches Earth, where he's dismayed to learn that his flower is nothing other than a common rose, and that he has wasted so much of his time caring for her. He is disconsolate when, wandering in a vast desert, he meets a wild fox. The fox says to the little prince, "To me you are still nothing more than a little boy who is just like 100,000 other little boys, and I have no need of you, and you on your part have no need of me. To you I am nothing more than a fox, like 100,000 other foxes. But if you tame me, then we shall need each other. To me you will be unique in all the world, and to you I shall be unique in all the world. One only understands the things that one tames, and you become responsible forever for what you have tamed. If you want a friend, tame me." Later, after the little prince has tamed the fox, they come to a sad farewell. "Goodbye," said the fox, "and now here is my secret. A very simple secret. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. It is exactly the time that you have wasted for your rose that makes your rose so very important." So the fox has given you my prescription for domesticating the computer. Our success in the end should be measured by how much we come to care about them and about the things that they can do for us. At the festival, we're going to see many manifestations of the intersection of art and the kind of pervasive information technology in a modern city which has been made far more interactive than it normally is, perhaps more than any other city in the world. We should expect things to be really different, but we should also demand of the artists that they appeal to us viscerally and aesthetically as well as intellectually. Personally, I can't wait. Thank you.
Can I have the computer, please? Wow, that was great. The best part about that is I don't have to give my talk. We can go directly to Ben. Thank you, Joel. Okay. Yes, I'm sure. What kind of user interface is that? I love that Little Prince quote. I think I'm going to definitely steal it for my talks from now on. We'll try and get the 25-year goal going here. But maybe I just want to mention initially that tonight, I'm going to sort of power through a lot of the projects that we'll be presenting during the festival and give Ben some time to speak in greater depth about a specific project. So a little bit of an overview and then specifics. If there's anything that interests you, you can find out a lot more information about it on our website, which is ZeroOneSJ.org. And this tonight is the world premiere of our new website. So I hope you enjoy it. There will be a number of world premieres at the festival, and surprisingly, or perhaps not, you can also buy tickets to the festival on this website. And finally, I should add, thank you, Bo, that you don't have to buy tickets. You can also just make a donation if you'd like. I want to perhaps continue the Little Prince literary allusions here and turn to the great Italian writer, Italo Calvino, and talk a little, just really briefly about some of my interest in doing a festival around the notion of the interactive city, which is so much predicated on the kind of work that Joel was showing you. And he wrote in Invisible Cities, "The great Khan contemplates an empire covered with cities that weigh upon the earth and upon mankind, crammed with wealth and traffic, overladen with ornaments and offices, complicated with mechanisms and hierarchies, swollen, tense, ponderous. The empire is being crushed by its own weight," Kublai thinks, and in his dreams, cities as light as kites appear, pierced like laces, cities transparent as mosquito netting, cities like leaves, veins, cities lined with hard hand's palm, filigree cities to be seen through their opaque and fictitious thickness. I think that's really one of the goals that we're trying to do with this festival, is look at how can we use these technologies to give us a different sense of being in the city. The city's always been a site of transformation, of lives, of populations, even of civilizations. With the rise of the megacity, however, with the advent of 24/7 rush hours, with the inexorable conversion of public space into commercial space, with the rise of surveillance, with the computer-assisted precision of redlining, with the viral advance of the xenophobic, and the contemporary city is weighted down. We dream of something more, not something planned and canned like another confectionery spectacle, something that can respond to our dreams, something that will transform with us, not just perform change on us like an operation. Those are the kinds of projects we're trying to present at the festival. What you're seeing right now is an illumination of the Richard Meier designed City Hall Rotunda in San Jose by a Japanese artist named Akira Hasegawa. He's working from a database of about 1 million different images and sort of transitioning from one to other in a sort of very mesmerizing kind of effect where you're looking at it, it looks the same, and all of a sudden you look away and it's changed completely. And it really will become one of the main beacons for the festival and is also the site for the opening ceremonies at City Hall. One of the things that I think that goal we had for the Interactive City theme was to do something really remarkable, to change how we feel about the city, what the city can do for us. And I think a really remarkable example that sort of points to that, although it's still internal in the gallery setting, is a project that's being shown in the next few days at the San Jose Museum of Art called Listening Post by Mark Hansen and Ben Rubin. And I think I just want to point to this project as a kind of, the exact kind of thing that Joel was talking about. It has this visceral attention that it causes, but it's based on things that could never have happened before. Listening Post analyzes all the text typed just moments ago by tens of thousands of people in internet chat rooms around the world. It presents them as 6 different movements combining musical tones, sound effects, synthesized voice, and scrolling text. For example, in the first movement, Listening Post monitors and displays a randomly typed text beginning with "I am." It then searches the internet for related phrases, creating a simultaneously funny, sad, nonsensical, pathetic, yearning, quotidian, and ultimately mesmerizing tonal poem of identity in the internet age. For centuries, the soaring buttresses, vaulted ceilings, and luminous stained glass of cathedrals, along with the hymns and chants, have transmitted the ineffable. With Listening Post, Hansen and Rubin use algorithms and software and data mining to allow a human grasp of the inestimable scale, the vast content, and the nano-immediacy of our communications universe, while at the same time investing it with a sense of awe at what has been wrought. So if we can achieve some of those kinds of results in the festival, we'll be thrilled. And also, it's something that you should all come and see at the San Jose Museum of Art. The other thing, sort of from the sublime to a little bit of the ridiculous, one of the things I sort of want to warn us about in thinking about the festival is that we can sometimes imagine things before we can actually experience them. So imagine, and this story, 3 women, 2 younger and 1 senior citizen, were sitting naked in a sauna. Suddenly there was a beeping sound. One of the women pressed her forearm and the beep stopped. The others looked at her questioningly. "That was my pager," she said. "I have a microchip under the skin of my arm." A few minutes later, a phone rang. The second young woman lifted her palm to her ear. When she finished, she explained, "That was my mobile phone. I have a microchip in my hand." The older woman felt very low tech, but not to be outdone, she decided she had to do something just as impressive. She stepped out of the sauna and went into the bathroom. She returned with a piece of toilet paper hanging from her rear end. The others raised their eyebrows and stared at her. The woman finally said, "Well, will you look at that? I'm getting a fax." The point being that sometimes we sort of have to imagine this future, and we can imagine it before it's actually possible. And that's really an interesting kind of dilemma that happens all the time in trying to explain what digital art is, especially to a very technologically advanced audiences like this, who will often say, "Oh, well, that computing thing, we did that years ago." And I really want to stress that the projects and the artwork in this festival, they're not about the newest technologies, they're about new kinds of experiences. The other sort of caveat is that we sometimes talk about the combination of art and technology as if it was some kind of straight line path to the future. And in fact, a lot of times what artists are doing is that they're figuring out how to misuse technology. And so Nam June Paik, probably the most famous and well-known media artist in the 20th century, is most well known for the way he abused televisions. He didn't try to make televisions better, he tried to make them different, he tried to make our understanding of them different, and that affected, in a similar way, the invention of highways and automobiles had all these sort of vast consequences that Joel was talking about in his talk. Nevertheless, I think we are at a really interesting and pivotal moment where there is this convergence of the embedded computing, the ubiquitous networking, and the locative media services, and what are artists going to do with that? And one of the projects that we sort of taken for our mascot for the festival is a project by Beatrice DaCosta called Pigeon Blog. And I think, again, I'll explain what it does, which is basically that she has created a chip where on that chip she's put a cell phone, a GPS device, and a pollution sensor, an air pollution sensor. She then straps that to the backpack, in a special backpack, onto pigeons working with San Jose-based carrier pigeon enthusiasts, and releases the pigeons at sites around the festival. And as they fly home up to 90 miles away, they're blogging, they're cell phoning in real-time measurements of pollution levels as they go along. So it's a kind of unusual combination of technology that the HP labs might not have been thinking about. And there is an interesting thing. She was surprised when this got picked up by New Scientist that several scientists were calling her and saying, I'd like to know more about this project, not really thinking that it was a scientific project. But right now we measure air pollution with certain measurements that are at A and B, but not in between, and you have to model that in between based on the air current. So if they're getting real-time measurements of the air pollution, they can measure these against their models of that particular area. So there is a scientific use potentially, but that's not why she did it. And I think the important point in terms of Joel's talk around pervasive computing is that this is possible not because she was in the lab at the creation moment of a certain technology, but because it has become commodified, is becoming increasingly pervasive. And for a few $100s, she can make her own computer chip and her own combination of computing aspects that then get used in different ways. And speaking of thinking of different ways of using devices, and one of the most pervasive devices that is around is the cell phone, and a number of projects in the festival take advantage of this. Stephen Bull's Cellphonia is an ongoing do-it-yourself opera where the participants sing karaoke style into their cell phones, and the resulting performance of all singers is mixed as a 24/7 MP3 streamcast. But the participants add their own voices to the opera by singing the automatically created libretto via RSS feeds from the San Jose Mercury News website. So you're using these RSS feeds from the Mercury News that come through an algorithm onto your cell phone to create a libretto, which you then sing into your cell phone and becomes a broadcast community-based opera about the news in San Jose during the festival. Again, I'm not sure that's what Verizon was thinking of, but maybe. Of course, there are the straight line kinds of uses of these technologies where you say, okay, let's make a film, but let's use digital cameras and cell phones to make that film. So Andrea Mode is creating a San Jose Instant Film Festival, and I think it's interesting to understand a little bit about how the artists are thinking about it. And she writes, during ZeroOne San Jose, your digital camera, mobile phone, or brilliant idea can be your ticket to instant cinematic greatness. How do you get there? Like any budding movie maker, you volunteer your skills in storytelling, visualizing, or sound recording, and team up with other folks. Become an auteur by creating an instant screenplay on the San Jose Instant Film Festival website. Visual types with camera phones can sign up to receive shooting assignments via SMS. Want to be a voice actor or sound recorder? Sign up for sound assignments, etc. So over the course of the week, these different people are getting assignments to do a project. Until your complete movie premieres at the closing party, you probably won't know who the other members of your film crew are or how they interpreted their assignments. So roam the city and follow your muse, be it Hitchcock, Kurosawa, or America's Funniest Home Videos. And again, this is a little bit the artist version of that network appliance that's using the network to pull all sorts of different things together at a particular moment in a particular way. But it's not necessarily the straightforward translation device. Participation is one of the sort of defining characteristics of what makes digital art different from looking at a painting. The art responds to you even as you're responding to it. And a sort of very interesting example of that is a project called P2P, or Power to the People, by Matt and Susan Gorbett. We're putting a sign on top of the Chamber of Commerce building, which is 200 light bulbs in a grid. And right where the picture is taken from, there's basically a grid of light switches. And it's a grid of 200 light switches, and you just flip the switch on and off. And in doing that, you turn the lights on and off, and you can spell different kinds of messages. It's a kind of simple but electronic version of the speaker's corner, perhaps. But also, I think it speaks to this notion of using the pervasive technologies that do exist, electricity, light switches, and using them in ways that are defined by the user, not necessarily by the authors or the artists or the creators. Another local group called C5 is using these GPS-defined, driven Go cars to drive around San Jose and create a game contest. And so briefly, they're just again show you to what lengths they're going. These cars are actually being used in San Francisco to take people on tours of the Golden Gate Bridge. But when they come to San Jose, C5 is creating a geocache scavenger hunt. So you have to find certain kinds of scavenger items using the car to navigate around the back streets of San Jose. But it doesn't stop there. Once you win, once you get to the end point, you actually then are allowed to have an interview with, say, a curator, or in this case, Gordon Knox from Montalvo, and the winner then of that interview gets a residency at Montalvo, or gets to perform on the stage. So it becomes a combination of scavenger hunt with American Idol. This is one of everyone's sort of favorite projects called Karaoke Ice, and basically these three artists from New York have tricked out an old step van to be an ice cream truck, and it drives around in the 95-degree heat in San Jose in August and stops and starts handing out ice pops to gather a crowd around it. Once the crowd is gathered, they actually then open up the back end and invite people to come in and sing karaoke songs about ice cream. And for instance, at 1 o'clock every day in front of the Museum of Art, the team component of our program, they will be having karaoke battles in the karaoke ice truck, which happens to be driven by Remedios the squirrel. But it's really an example where pop culture meets popsicles. Matt Roberts, we can't get away. We are in San Jose, we are in the Bay Area. It is a sort of edge city situation. There happen to be a lot of cars. So Matt Roberts, in parking space for this project, the Mobile Performance Group investigates one of the most ubiquitous spaces in the United States, the parking lot. In parking spaces, MPG will move through the city looking for empty parking lots to use as raw material to create improvised sound and image from and as a performance space. The formula for this performance is as follows. Roam the city searching for parking lots. Once an appropriate space is found, record and collect both audio and visual material from that space. Using only recorded audio and visual material from that space, the performers will create an improvised audio-visual performance using custom real-time video software. So essentially, they're using the city as their source for an evening performance, DJ, VJ, and the club moves from inside the club to outside in the parking lot. John Klima is one of the other things that's happening with a lot of these projects that they're integrating to existing infrastructures. Cell phone infrastructure, the VTA, the light rail system in San Jose. So John Klima has this project called St. Joe, which is a hyper-narrative that unfolds within the landscape of the VTA light rail system. Participants can board the train at any stop, at which time, using their mobile phone, they can dial a provided number to enter their origin and their destination. As the participants' voyage commences, a dynamic audio history unfolds, referencing a variety of landmarks on the way. Sounds like your standard tour, right? No, it's an artist. The landmarks, however, are not your standard tourist fare. Locations, buildings, and vistas, both mundane and curious, are chosen to carefully weave a semi-fictitious tale of the city, drawing from actual San Jose history, archived newspapers, police records, and local folklore, and audio and visual construction is elaborated while the viewer travels from station to station. And again, just to sort of emphasize the dynamic part of it, two people sitting on the same chairs on chairs next to each other, if they had different start or stop points, they're going to be hearing a different story as they're going along, dependent on where they're starting and stopping their journey. But beauty is important, of course, and there are many beautiful projects in the festival. This is one of our favorite. It's called Lichtschwarm by Jurgen Meier. Lichtschwarm is an interactive group of communicating luminaries which recognize its environment through sensor fields. Light changes with the speed and amount of users. It can reflect on noise or sounds, time, weather, surrounding light sources, mobile phones or animals, cars, and birds. So in other words, this lightscape changes dynamically depending upon a number of different parameters, and the city starts to react to however the artist is setting up the parameters. In the same way that Listening Post is setting up the parameters for understanding internet chat to turn it into a kind of opera. They're also selecting the inputs that will affect how the lighting happens. But of course, it's not always about misusing the technology or looking for different kinds of uses. We have sponsored a number of, in collaboration with corporations here, a number of residencies. Kobe Van Tonder is an artist from South Africa, and she's working with IDEO to create an interactive skateboard that's transmitting through a wireless transmitter information about direction and yi and yaw and speed, and using those as variables into a sound program so that as you're skating, you're creating the sound environment that you're skating in. And so it becomes a sort of self-choreographed sound environment via the interactive skateboard. Ashok Sukumaran, a young artist from Mumbai, is working with Sun Microsystem Labs to create this project, which he's currently calling Fenestroscope, and we're working mightily with him to change that. But basically using sunspot technology that allows a laser, not a laser, an infrared beam to connect to these sunspots, which then generate a dynamic visual or lit landscape that gets lit up by pointing at it. So basically he's creating an alternative skyline that you have to sort of find and identify through this fenestroscope device. So these are just a few of the projects of the more than 38 Interactive City project and the over 100 art projects that we're presenting throughout the festival, August 7th through 13th. I want to now bring up Ben Hooker to the podium, who's working with his collaborator, Shona Kitchen, to work with a city-sponsored project out at the airport called Data Nature. Ben Hooker is a multimedia designer who divides his time between consultancy, research, and teaching. His projects typically involve collaboration with architects and industrial designers and explore the consequences of intangible computer-generated data landscapes merging with real spaces. He's especially interested in finding ways to articulate the overlaps between the phenomenal and ephemeral worlds of materiality and data. Ben has a part-time post as a research fellow in the Interaction Design Research Studio at the Royal College of Art and Design, and also tutors final year students on the graphic design course at Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design, and is working at Intel Labs while he's here. Please welcome Ben Hooker.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm just going to show quickly two sets of slides. One will be the project that we're working on for the Isaiah Festival, but before that I want to show the precursor of that, which is more of a conceptual project about thinking about the city. So this was a collaboration, again, with Shona Kitchen, who's an architect. My background is more screen-based design, and the aim of this project purely was to think about ways that information and communication technologies could be used to enhance rather than distract from the culture and aesthetics of their surroundings. So we were thinking about how when you see, for instance, screens in public spaces used in things like ATM machines, they're very much sort of windows into disconnected virtual worlds. And we just wanted to, in a very free way, develop some kind of architectural story, a sort of a story about thinking about how we could live with technology in different ways. So the project is called Edgetown, and we were very inspired by the landscapes that you find at the edge of the city, places which aren't really countryside or aren't really the city centre, sort of these zones of infrastructure. And we were thinking about how they are traditionally very undesirable places, perhaps where the cheapest housing is. You know, it's not people who can't live in a rural idyll, but can't live in a space which has sort of any urban density. But these spaces, in some senses, are very exciting. They're very kind of they're so turbulent, and you know, if you get out of your car at the edge of the city in these landscapes, you sort of experience the city in a way which is perhaps more visceral than you could in other places. And also it's interesting to think of their connection to virtual spaces. So perhaps when we think of buying a book on Amazon, we don't consider the infrastructure. It's kind of, we think of it just as a screen, as quite a virtual experience until the book arrives. But it's interesting to think that in London, for instance, at the edge of London, the Amazon.co.uk depot is the biggest warehouse in the whole of Europe. So it's a very physical place that's as a result of all this immaterial building work. So that was sort of also made us interested in these kind of sites, because they are the ones that maybe bear the physical consequences to the fluidity that we demand in our lives when we live in the city centre. So as a kind of just a kind of a design exercise, we thought about what would, if someone chose to live in these landscapes that are not very desirable, these kind of infrastructural landscapes at the edge of the city, but if someone was to find sort of nourishment in these places, what would an appropriate architecture be for that? So we developed this fictitious borough of London called Edgetown, which is full of people who have chosen to live in this space because it offers them some kind of experience that the city centre or the countryside doesn't offer. And this is a house in Edgetown. The idea is the house is built halfway over a busy road, and at one end of the house is a mesh sort of air garden balcony completely exposed to the noise and the fumes of traffic. And we thought maybe as the sun sets, you may get these beautiful vistas of kind of car tail lights streaming off into the distance. But in contrast, at the other end of the house, we were thinking there would need to be a space which was very isolated, air-conditioned, sheltered from the city. So thinking about if you were to live here, you could sort of stand in this space and see the kind of the movement and see the fumes and the activity of the environment. But then at the other end of the house, you could retreat from this space completely. And then we thought about, well, there were these areas in the middle of the house, these kind of transitional spaces, which would be semi-shielded from the harsh roadside environment. And because this house would be built over a freeway, the embankment, the grass at the edge of the freeway becomes sort of the garden of the house. And it's quite interesting that on closer inspection, places like this are surprisingly rich in wildlife. And so you can imagine standing here and looking through this mesh floor, and you're getting this strange landscape, which is a hybrid space of maybe burnt out tires mixed with foliage, mixed with birds of prey that are feeding on the animals that live in the embankment. Maybe every so often, typically these areas are where planes are in their holding stacks before they land at the airport. So you get this very kind of mixed, very synthetic and organic place. And so thinking of this strange garden, turbulent garden of fragments of glass and bits of weeds and plants and stuff, we thought about, well, if you were to, maybe the person who lives here, rather than plants, they would have machines that would sort of thrive on the activity of this space. So the project goes on. As I said, it's sort of an architectural story. The idea is that it would potentially open up a space of design for a more applied project in the future. So we designed these machines that could be used to sample the ethereal turbulence of this roadside space. Machines that would be used to monitor, record things that there was no reason why you would want to record it. This sort of like a machine that's deliberately designed to attract dust to it, and then as the dust lands on its surface and causes short circuits, it sort of triggers a mechanism which wipes away the dust. So it's kind of just foolish monitoring of these kind of spaces. Another machine which scans bits of dust, attracts dust to its statically charged surface, records their shapes, then burns the dust away. And other machines that can be used to, so if you can imagine these various machines which are sensing this activity of this landscape, maybe sort of the patterns of passing cars, or the sort of the bits of fragments of grit thrown to the side of the road, maybe there would be screens that would reveal these data streams. So here is a electromechanical hedge that's made of solenoid mechanisms, that the idea would be you could maybe tune it in to receive the data from one of these other sensors. This is another machine. So we went on to design this whole collection of noise farming machines. And then this is a nice a 3D drawing of that house. And the idea is that the different areas of the house, the very exposed space above the road or the very isolated space that's completely shielded from its roadside location, this house provides a series of different contexts for these new electronic devices. So we're thinking that a person can live here, the person living here could strategically position these machines and that record things or display things in a way they could use the architecture of this house and electronic objects as a way of controlling the way they mediate with the environment outside. So anyway, we went on to then think about this whole area at the edge of London that's full of these kind of infrastructural landscapes. And we thought, well, if this area that we call Edgetown, if it has a downtown, then arguably it's the airport, because it's the area that perhaps presents the most extreme condition of this mishmash landscape, where you get sort of wildlife and technology interacting in such an interesting way. And so we thought, as another conceptual exercise, what could we design? What could we propose to build in the airport? What would be an appropriate design proposal? And we like the idea of thinking about a park, the equivalent of a park, but for this very mishmash landscape. I mean, when you think of a park in a city centre, you think of a very, a green space which is maintained with flowers, but maybe a park in the airport would be a sensor park. So it's an area that's demarcated by this fence, and inside there are all these different sensors that record information about the planes as they fly overhead. So the idea is this park is built underneath the flight path of the approaching planes, and as each plane flies over, information about it is recorded and displayed. So it's just sort of a bit of simulation. So the idea is that as the planes fly over, these sensors record information, and they present them on perhaps electromechanical screens. So the experience would be a little bit like when you watch, say, football on television, where you're getting the live video feed, but also data about that event superimposed on it. So you can imagine standing at the edge of this park, looking through these various display mechanisms and being told information about every plane as it flies over. So this sensor park is fusing together the physical event of the plane flying over, but also its informational indices. And so we're kind of speculating that this could be a kind of an interesting new urban situation. This is some more drawings of the park. So that project was sort of formed the foundation, along with some other things, for applying to do this residency as part of Isaiah. So as Steve was saying, Shona Kitchen and myself have been commissioned to create a temporary artwork as part of the festival, and it's meant to center around the airport and the airport community. So what we've been doing is, when we've been visiting the airport, is basically finding out about all the interesting behind-the-scenes activities that happen at San Jose. So we've been basically embedding ourselves or shadowing as many people that would let us follow them around as we could, to find out about the aspects of the airport that you wouldn't normally experience perhaps as a passenger. So whether it's been meeting the person that looks after the burrowing owls that live on the airfield and finding about what they have to do to relocate them when they burrow too close to the runways, or finding out about the weekly baggage handlers barbecue, which is interesting in that this barbecue is strategically positioned just out of the line of sight from when you're in the departure lounge, so you can't see it from looking out the window. Or we went out with the manager on duty 4 a.m., the guy that checks the runways for pieces of debris before the first flights take off in the morning. And for us, that was quite a magical experience because the airport is so quiet, and we're driving along on the runways looking for scraps of metal that have fallen off planes. That he does this every day. And then he waits by the side of the runway before the very first flights take off, which is quite an amazing thing to be so close to the runway, and then to give the go-ahead for the planes taking off. So we've been sort of finding out about all the interesting stories that stories about people that are very much connected with the airport as a system, as well as finding out about other more obvious data sources that we could perhaps tap into, such as arrival and departure information or noise monitoring, etc. So the project is called Data Nature, which is basically because it's about revealing the natural and the technological aspects of the airport. And the anchor of the whole project is the boarding pass, because it's even with e-ticketing, the boarding pass is still a very, very familiar object. It has a certain size. It has a certain feel. It's this mixture of sort of the pre-printed ticket with the personal data printed on top. So we're using the boarding pass as a way to communicate all these behind-the-scenes stories. So the concept of the project is to dynamically create boarding passes which show these behind-the-scenes stories of the airport. So this is just a mock-up. We're in the process at the moment of sort of working this out. But it could be, for instance, images about the burrowing owls, stories of the wildlife of the airport, juxtaposed with perhaps the silhouette of the last plane that landed, with information about weather, or stories of people who work at the airport that are volunteering on a daily basis. And the concept is to install new cameras in places, and but also pre-collect information. So there will be these two ticket machines, and when you press a button on the machine, you get one of these tickets out. And as you hit the button, this ticket is dynamically created. And there's a camera in the machine as well, so as you hit the button, you are part of the ticket as well. And the network is deliberately, the social network and the technological network that we're setting up is deliberately quite tangled, because we're trying to say that we're not trying to say airports are good or bad, just that their presence is, they're a very, very interesting situation, and there are very many stories that perhaps you don't think about that happen sort of out of view from you as sort of a traveler through them. So the ticket machines, there'll be one installed at the Terminal C at San Jose and one downtown. And these are sort of tests of prototypes of size and scale. It would be a very simple interface. It would just be a button that you press to get the ticket. And this is a semi-technical overview. And downtown, there'll be this additional element, which is a rotating sign, which looks a little bit like a radar crossed with an advertising hoarding sign. And the idea is it will just attract attention, and you go up to the machine and you press the button. And downtown, the machine will be positioned alongside these other infrastructural elements that you see in the city. So I'm sure I always walk by these things, and I kind of have an inkling that there's something to do with maybe phone lines or water or electricity. And the machine downtown, the ticket machine, will be positioned alongside these machines. So it's sort of suggesting that it's to do with the infrastructure, but because it'll have animated lights on its facade and this rotating sign, people will still be attracted to it, but it'll still sit amongst these other objects as if showing that it's part of the infrastructure of the city. And the other location of the machine is inside Terminal C. So these are the slides that we had to do to get permission to build it. That's where they've sort of got technical bits in. And we're installing some new, strangely, the places that we want, although there are lots of webcams in the San Jose area on the roads and stuff, where we actually want to record new images, there's no Wi-Fi or webcams or anything, so we're having to use webcams with cell phone modems on them to get these images sort of very close to the runway of when the planes land. So that's it, basically. As I say, it's in progress at the moment. What we're doing at the moment is getting this group of people who are going to be contributing stories and images as the project is live, and also working out the technological system a bit more. Okay.
So we're going to Oh, water, that would be good.
Sorry?
We're going to sit over here and
okay.
take a couple of questions.
Better tell them they get late.
So we're going to take, if there are a couple of questions that anyone wants to ask, we can stay a couple more minutes. We realize we're running late, so, but just briefly, if there are people who have questions, do you have a question, sir? I think there's a microphone in the audience. Here it comes. Over here, Wanda? Oh, okay.
I can hear you, but it's not.
Anyway, I hope that your Edgetown house has a sign on it saying, if you lived here, you'd be home now. You wouldn't mind. But actually, I want to talk about this ubiquitously connected world that you described. Now, not that this would ever happen, but let's imagine that the government and the NSA might start using apparatus like that to spy on everyone without warrants. I know that couldn't happen. But don't you feel a concern if you build an infrastructure that is that connected, that is that centralized, and that uses this? How did you think about those issues when you were looking at your design?
Which project?
His original,
He's talking about Joel.
I assume you're talking to me.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was still in the house,
Oh, right.
Yeah, of course we thought about it. Security is the greatest impediment. Security and building a trustworthy system is the most realistic reason why none of these dreams will come true, because you're not going to trust your information, personal and otherwise, to any system in which you can't receive a reasonable guarantee that it hasn't been tampered with, won't be seen by people who shouldn't see it, and so forth. There's another talk and another S-curve that's labeled trusted information, critical and pervasive trusted systems. I had it as a backup slide in case anyone had asked it during the talk. So it's a very long topic. In fact, I have spent the last 3 years chairing a National Academy panel on a research program for trustworthy systems with this stuff very, very much in mind. If you're interested, there'll be a lot to read about it soon. It'll be a book that gets published, but it's a very hard problem, and it's not any different, I think, than any other highly interconnected system. But if you don't, I don't think you can add it later. It has to be built into the design from the beginning, and there was a significant attempt to do that. I just thought it would complicate things to talk about it today. If there are high security artworks, then I think they're going to be probably at risk at this festival.
Well, you said two contradictory things, and I'll just go on. You said something which I think was very right, which is that centralized systems often fail because people want to own the equipment they have, even if it's more expensive, and it's not as powerful as something that effectively does time sharing that goes in. But at the same time, you remarked about how much more you could do with time sharing, the translating device, which actually I think you do have an built today. You said, well, the translating device, we could have gotten that by making it a centralized infrastructure. So I found those two ideas to be
Why don't we talk about it later?
Are there other questions? Yes, sir.
With the rapid change of the technology involved, I'd like to hear your thoughts about scaling and timing.
Could you speak into the mic?
I'm sorry. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the scaling and the timing of the introduction of this kind of information utility, given the speed with which things are going to change.
Yeah, I guess your question was, how soon do I think all this is going to happen? Is that what you're saying? No? I can't hear you well, I'm sorry. It's a very...
No, I didn't mean that. For example, one of your examples was the interface of the plug in the wall, right? And interfaces and the like have to be standardized in order to work. On the other hand, the kind of infrastructure you're talking about, it takes decades to implement, and at the same time, technology is changing, and so there's a tension there, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about it.
Well, it's a long discussion. I felt very strongly that we needed an information version of the plug in the wall that would stay the same while things on both sides changed. And we created an attempt to create that kind of a layer. We called it eSpeak. It was a way of building a utility so that operating systems could add a layer which would not change their function, but which would provide essentially a common mechanism for the interchange of enough information so that they could interact with each other and that they could perform the kinds of linking which would be necessary for collaborative work on services. It didn't catch on. HP marketed it actually as a product. We had a whole division allocated to it in San Jose about 6 years ago. And people said that wasn't the way they wanted to do it. Things like XML and others have emerged that people are trying to do some of the same things with. They fail for the reason of the previous question. They do not have an adequate security model. Same for ActiveX and so forth. And I think it's a hard problem, and it is going to take time. I am notoriously inaccurate and absurdly optimistic about how long things take, because I like to think how long they should take as opposed to how long they do take. So you're quite right to point that out. It is a major problem here, and it would be very nice if people could agree on how that task needs to get done, but it's, there are a lot of people thinking about it. Hopefully the next generation internet will have something to say about it as well.
And I think appropriately in terms of thinking about how long things should be and are, we have run late. I want to thank everyone for coming this evening, and you want to say a couple words before we leave?
Very quickly, please join us next Monday for a wireless sensor talks with Richard Newton, DK Arvin from Edinburgh, and Roger Mike from Sun Labs. And then the following Monday, we have Bob Price, who's the former CEO of Control Data. Thank you, Joel Birnbaum, Steve Dietz, and Ben Hooker, and thank you all for coming. Good night.